Watching Midsommar feels like watching a great work of art, akin to the construction of the Great Sphinx, or in this case, it might be more like watching the Sphinx fall apart as the constants of the universe tear it down. I felt worn down by the time the credits rolled, with such an intense discomfort and claustrophobia that was as real as any struggles that I was going through at the time. This movie did not make me feel uncomfortable, it made me uncomfortable. And for some reason, I think that sharing that feeling with you is a good idea too. I present to you Midsommar. I was broken out of my trance when this movie started by one of the most horrifying outbursts of tears that I've heard in a film. We've seen people cry, both in real life and in movies, but I've never seen anything that captures the wails of a broken person like this movie does. And the strange thing is, when I hear this, I don't feel sad or even empathetic. It feels to me like a baby is crying and it's our job to just pat it on the back and calm it down. That's not a mistake, that's not something with me, that's how this scene is supposed to be viewed. This is us viewing the scene from Christian, the main character's boyfriend, from his point of view, without putting the camera in the first person. We're feeling what he feels even though we're seeing everything unfold from this third person perspective. And how horrific is that? That this person is struggling, mourning the death of their entire family, and Christian feels this desire to just shut her up like a baby. The death of her family to him is equal to the baby not being fed or being gassy. Similarly, the ritual of the Etta Stupa carries such an intensity that I almost had to skip this scene on my second viewing of the film. Interestingly, not the first, and we'll get to that. I wouldn't say I have a weak stomach or anything of that nature, but I felt traumatized from my first viewing of this scene. I'm sure that at this moment, you have no idea what an Etta Stupa is. Most of our main characters didn't, and I didn't. So hold on to that mystery for a moment. Don't spoil it for yourself. When all of our characters are invited to be part of an Etta Stupa, they gladly join for what they view as a learning experience. A chance to study another culture, in this case the old rituals of the Swedish. As they all stand together, watching on as the elders of the family are escorted to the precipice of the mountain above, the group watches on with almost a reverence. Most of the group does, not Danny. Danny feels dread. She can't enjoy the ritual like everyone else because of her past experiences, and yet she is forced to watch on like everyone else does. On my first viewing, I felt horrible for her. But something happens. The music starts to change from these devotional, one-note, almost cries of prayer to something rotten and unsettling. The elder figures reach out above to speak directly to something ancient and spiritual. If you've ever shot a gun, you know the feeling of a gun being shot around you. It's more than just the sound or the reverberance that you feel. It feels like the oxygen is being sucked out of the air right around you. At that moment, the gun is already loaded, and the oxygen is moments away from being sucked out of the air, and Danny's the only one who is noticed. The trauma of her family's death, specifically the suicide of her sister, allows her to sense what is about to happen. The woman throws herself from the cliff, reopening the wound that Danny flew thousands of miles away from home to get away from. Not only that, but it happens again with another elder throwing himself from the precipice, only this time he doesn't die on impact. And we watch on as he is executed with a hammer. This movie takes place in 2019. Someone cries out in disgust at how everyone can just watch people kill themselves and not feel anything. And it is explained to them that this is an ancient and respected ritual where the elderly end their lives before the onset of disease and dementia overtake them. Regardless of what you feel about assisted suicide or retirement homes, surely in 2019, there has to be a more respectful and clean way of commencing this ritual where there is no need for the cliff or the hammer. The intentions here don't matter anymore because it's barbaric. And now chew on this. I think that the true horror of this scene comes out on a second viewing. Because when the camera closes in on Danny panting and breaking under this pressure, her sense of what is about to happen next is our sense now. We have her trauma. We know what is about to happen. And this makes the scene almost unwatchable. The anxiety, it made me want to cry. It made me want to look away. It made my stomach hurt. And I realize that sounds like an exaggeration, but I encourage you, if you haven't seen this movie, watch it, first of all. And if you've seen it once, watch this scene again and see what you feel. This is a master at work. The last thing that I want to discuss are a few shots used in the film. I think a much longer and comprehensive breakdown of the cinematography could be made, but I am not the person for that. Instead, I'm going to focus on a few shots that I felt were particularly relevant to me. And first, that starts with Christian. Christian, as I mentioned earlier, is the main character's boyfriend. He's very self-absorbed. He lacks a sense of empathy, compassion. He's manipulative, and he's very rarely genuine to anybody. The film doesn't have a bad guy, so to say, but if there was one, Christian is pretty close to it. We get a few scenes of how his relationship is with Danny, and the framing of one scene in particular accomplishes so much with so little. And the dynamic of the scene is changed with the introduction of a mirror. I'm sure many of us have come home with our significant other after an undiscussed dispute makes its way from wherever we were into the home, and we just kind of awkwardly sit there for a second, waiting for this argument to unfold. Now, what's interesting here is that in this shot, we see Danny, but Christian is not in the shot. A reflection of Christian is, and we see both of them, but only one of them is really there. Only one of them is really in the shot. There's the genuine Danny in the flesh, and then there's an image of Christian. I hate how relatable this scene is, and I wish it was for the right reasons. Also, the scene where Danny wails once again is brilliant. In the beginning of the film, we see Danny crying while Christian does essentially nothing to help her or feel with her. Towards the end of the film, we see the opposite situation. During this moment of pain, she is surrounded by women shouting with her, pulling her to the ground, not letting her escape this moment. It's incredibly claustrophobic, and seeing how the inversion of Christians' lack of compassion can be equally horrific is a reminder that our boundaries are important. And when we feel pushed away by someone, it's very easy to watch ourselves run in the opposite direction of the thing that hurt us, even if something just as painful lies in wait. This is all to say that Midsommar is an incredible film, and if you haven't seen it, prepare to be pushed to your boundaries. I have never felt so intense as I did while watching Midsommar. There's a point to this though. Don't worry, this is not all composed just to make you squirm. Christian and people like him are bad. Ritualistic societies governed by arcane and dystopic rules are bad. Don't let them into your life. When you're mourning the loss of your loved ones, do you want someone there for you who couldn't care less? Of course not. But there's also something to be said about not surrounding yourself with people who refuse to let you move on. Perspective is important. And rather than allow ourselves to get to this point, it's often better to cut ties while they're thin and save everyone the trouble. A lot of bad things happen in this movie, and they wouldn't have had to have happened if the main characters had more respect for themselves and loved themselves more. It's easy to get carried away by new cultures and trying to respect them. Danny and Christian allow themselves to be broken down by this ritualistic cult because they are immersing themselves in the culture and they're forgoing the rules that they normally abide by. This isn't too dissimilar to what we see when young people go off into the world for the first time or simply leave their parents' nest, immersing themselves in a new culture while forgetting the things that they know are true inside of them. These characters are only able to be pulled in these opposite directions towards isolation and then towards claustrophobic insulation because they have no true sense of self. I think the lesson to learn from Midsommar is that loving yourself is protecting yourself. It's all happening for a reason. Also, if this movie messed you up, go watch Oldboy, the Korean one, not the American one. It's awesome, and it's a lot more cathartic by the end, watching the bad guy get his shit kicked in. Shout out to my boy Nexpo. Thank you all. Good night.